Badger fans, what is going on? Great show today. Just on the freak out scale, where should we be? Let's do some stock up positional groups. And K2, Brandon Lane, Dupree Jones. Do we see those guys more going forward? Great guest today. New guest on the show today. Locked On Badgers. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers.
Man, Donnie, this is going to be in the edit room. Now my banner's not
You
playing.
are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. I'm Ryan Herrings, your host, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As FanDuel is here to spice up your sports weekends. Go over to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, let's bring in our new guest. Has not been on the show yet, but I've wanted to get him on. Donnie Slusher, beat writer over at Rivals, covers the Badgers. Got to meet him over in Platteville. Super nice guy. Really like his content, so I'm glad to have him here. We're going to start here, man. Big picture. You've seen social media. You've talked to the players. You've been in the press conference. You saw week one. Not what people thought, but where should we be, in your opinion, on the kind of reaction scale?
Game one, it's a real Rorschach situation. You know, you could look at it and interpret it any way you want it, and most people you could pretty much be right. But it was funny on Monday, the Monday before, last Monday before the game, Fickell, he said, he was like, college football is strange because there's no preseason. You know what I mean? Like they haven't played. Friday was the first time they played actual different players since January 1st. You know what I mean? So I try to be cautious whenever I make any takes about the season because it is so early. They have played such little football, and also take the no preseason and the fact that Western Michigan had 3 new coordinators. Like it's hard to game plan when, like what do you game plan against? So I am mostly trying to be cautious, but there were some issues that were big deals last year that kind of reemerged on Friday, which is also concerning. So, but ultimately, the fourth quarter was very strong, and that is the big positive to take from the game. That the fourth quarter they played their best ball in the fourth quarter, which they didn't always do last year.
You feel like kind of there was a point in the game where they just said, because I was thinking about this, and they almost said, "All right, like screw it, this isn't pretty. Now we're just going to lean on this and finish this game off, and we'll figure it out later."
It was, I mean, it wasn't pretty from the start. I mean, like if you look at it's like 15, I think 2 16-play drives back to back from the offense to start the game. And, you could be afraid that they're not being aggressive. You could say that they're hiding Tyler Van Dyke, and that, I mean, I think I even said that in my post-game takeaways, like, are they hiding Van Dyke? But ultimately, I feel like, going off what I said in no preseason, they were playing themselves back into shape. It felt like, it felt like a baby walking for the first time. You know what I mean? Like they were truly just taking it slow. Now it is a little bit concerning if like that becomes too much of their game, like that becomes too much. If, they become like a sluggish and slow team, like you do kind of want to see a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more fireworks out of them, but not too worried.
Let me ask you this. You hit on something that I think is interesting. You said there were a couple, I'm curious what your couple are. There were a couple things from last year we saw that kind of concerns from last year that were still there in week one. What's the biggest one of those for you?
I would say the red zone play calling, the red zone offense play calling, because it looked like, I mean, for the drives from like when they get the ball until they get to the red zone, it felt like there was a greater sense of identity. It felt like they were going to like lean on passing on the inside. They were going to they're going to lean on running up the middle when they were passing. It wasn't going to be too complex. It was mostly going to be simple. Let Van Dyke get out of the pocket, kind of, nothing too crazy. But then I feel like they would get to the red zone and then they would try to do some tough passes and they would try to, if they ran it, it was like 3 times in a row. Like it wasn't very creative. It didn't feel like there was as much purpose. So let's say the red zone defense or the red zone offense is a little bit worrying.
Talk to me about Van Dyke. So a guy that I've had a few different people on the show. I talked about what I thought. Very curious just to get as many perspectives as possible because ultimately this team is very dependent on how well that quarterback spot plays. And right now that's Tyler Van Dyke. What were your impressions of his first start? The good, the bad, everything in between?
It's hard. I mean, because the offense was so run-centric, it's a little bit hard to interpret. I mean, it's a little bit hard to get some real takeaways just because they didn't ask him to do that much at all. So it's like I can look at a lot of the passes, especially early on, and say that they were jittery and, say that he didn't look too comfortable. But also, if out of 8 plays, you only have to pass it twice, it's kind of hard to establish some consistency and establish a rhythm like that. So, I mean, I think it's going to take, I remember last year, the first game against Buffalo, it was mostly run-centric. The game, it was a little bit shaky early on, but then they eventually won out in the end, similar to Western Michigan. And in the second game, Tanner Mordecai, they just weren't doing anything for, like, they were just losing for a while. The offense couldn't start, and then at the end, he had to throw it 10 straight times, and he actually started to establish some rhythm. So I don't think it's going to take. I mean, I don't think it's going to take the Badgers losing for Van Dyke or for them to hopefully be more aggressive. But I feel like you kind of got to break the quarterback. You kind of got to break him in. You know, what I mean, he's been at comes from 3 different coordinators. Like he's not going to be comfortable throwing one pass and then and then 3 straight runs and then one pass and then 3 runs.
What about one of the narratives from last year that you think has been solved, right? So we've talked a lot last year about linebacker speed, defensive speed. We talked about snaps. We talked about some receiver issues, special teams. What did you look at in game one and said, all right, I think we do look a lot better there from week one last year?
If we're talking roster wise, the secondary is really appealing. You know what I mean? I mean, it's hard from their game plan. It's a little bit hard to guess. Like, were they running so much because like that was just like what they decided to do? I mean, could say that, or you could say that Ricardo Hallman wasn't passed to. Nazir Forkreen had an incredible game. Like got a guy named Hunter Wooler in the back end. Like when they need some insurance. So the secondary is. I said, and I was talking with a few B Reddit. I think the secondary might be the strongest group from top to bottom. You know what I mean? Like, love their starters, love their youth, love their backups. So that's probably the biggest, just kind of clear, like, kind of on paper improvement, but also the way they finished. The fact that their fourth quarter was their best quarter is probably the biggest. It's probably the most important part of that game. I felt like.
Yeah, I'm with you on the secondary. I think it's the best part of the team. I think there's veterans, there's stars, there's depth, there's physical players. You saw Xavier Lucas get in and make a play as he's kind of cracking in. Where does he finish the year, do you think? Do you think he finishes as maybe a guy that's getting some potential starting reps? Do you think he finishes as I think they got to keep getting him more reps, not only just because he's so physically talented, but they don't have any bodies next year. All these dudes graduate in the secondary.
Yeah. No, I mean, well, first off, with a lot of the freshmen, there's kind of a weird angst because of the transfer portal, and it's like, oh, like if you don't play this guy, is he gonna say screw this and go play somewhere where he's more assured to play? So like there's that kind of hanging over everything, as well as the running backs, and we'll get to that. But with
Mhm.
Xavier Lucas, it's a little bit hard. When you say it's hard when you say starting because Ricardo Hallman and Nizer Forkreen are some of the best players on the team in my opinion, and so but the question is like, can he get starting level snaps, or can he get kind of
Mhm.
up there in the rotation? And I think he honestly can. RJ Delancey, he's the guy they brought in from Toledo. He's appealing because he can play both on the outside and in the slot. But at the same time, I saw him make quite a bit of mistakes in camp. He's a little bit more volatile. Then you have guys like Amari Snowden and Jonas Duclona, to where they're returning players. The coaching staff knows them better, but at the same time, he's played better, in the short time. So I think he's ultimately. I think we might see him at like maybe like 30 to 40 snaps per game, pretty comfortably.
I think that'd be
My
great for
prediction.
him and for the team because I think he gives you physically something that some of the other guys just don't. He can just bump and run with some of the best athletes in the country. Um, thoughts really quick as you brought him up on Amari Snowden. That's a guy that I get questions about. Physical upside is obviously really intriguing with the length, the size, the speed. But where do you think he goes? Because you are seeing like Lucas has probably jumped him a little bit. Do you think he's more of a safety after this year? Do you think he's more of a corner? What's your thoughts on him long term?
I still think he's more of a cornerback. I would say it's a little bit tough this year because there's that upper class of guys. Like if he totally gets left in the dust in terms of rep count, that would be pretty concerning. But I, d- I did really like what I saw from him in the spring and the fall because I wasn't seeing much from him. Like I would forget about him a lot. You know what I mean? Like because the receiver group. I mean, I think it got deeper. All around,
Mm.
and we'll get to more of that. And they'd go up against him, and they weren't doing too well. Like I feel like some of the other like younger guys and like guys like RJ, like they were making a little bit more mistakes. So I still feel confident about them.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here. We're going to get back into some more stock ups, either positions or players. Talk about some of the young guys. Like, what was Donnie's impression of maybe not seeing Jones, Dupree, Brandon Lane? Should we see them more going forward? We're going to get into all of that next on Locked On Bad. We'll get back to Donnie in 1 second, but first, a quick break for our friends of the show over at LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the #1 spot for all of your hiring needs. Listen, it's tough out there as a hiring manager. You got to sift through a lot of people, and you don't want to spend a lot of time doing it because time is money. Go to LinkedIn and find the ultimate pieces for your team. They have screening questions and tools to get rid of some of the fluff before it even gets in the door. They got the spaghetti strainer to keep that stuff out, and then you just get the good quality noodles in the bowl. And the good quality noodles are the type of employees we're looking for. That's what LinkedIn helps you do over with their powerful suite of tools, the biggest platform, the biggest HR platform that you can find to hire the right people for your organization faster. And great offer over at LinkedIn. Post your job for free over at LinkedIn at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. It's something I've used. It's something my company uses. LinkedIn.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free and take advantage of the most powerful platform of professionals anywhere in the world. LinkedIn.com/lockedoncollege. Before we even do that, how can people follow your work? Where can people check out what you're doing?
Twitter's the best way, at Donnie Slusher _ see it on your screen. Also badgerblitz.com or wisconsin.rivals.com is where you can find all my stuff, all my articles and whatnot. But Twitter's the best way.
Definitely go check them out, guys. Twitter's on the screen if you're watching it. If not, we'll put that in the show notes too. Let's talk other stock up stuff. Like I know there's a lot of angst over this game, and by the way, I think that's fair. I think as a fan base, it's fair to feel some angst when you were down 14-13 against a MAC school that, quite frankly, wasn't good last year. So I think that's fair, but there's also positive stuff here. Give me a couple other stock up, either positional groups, scheme stuff you saw, players, whatever it is. What else is stock up from you in week 1?
The linebackers, the inside linebacker room, and the outside linebacker room. Like, honestly, the whole defense, except for the defensive line, I would say I feel like it was kind of more affirmed. Like, they added a lot of talent. The talent that they did have got a lot better. But on the outside, the trio of Daryl Peterson, John Pius, and Leon Lowry, I mean, just one of the best outside linebacker trio that Wisconsin has had in years, I think. As well as the inside linebackers, that's another room, kind of like the running backs, where some guys are going to feel like they're not getting enough reps, and they're going to be right. Like
Mm-hmm.
at the top, there's Jake Cheney and Jaheim Thomas. You're not going to take reps away from them, really. And then you got Christian Allegro, Tackett Curtis, Tyler Jancy. That's the second tier of those three guys who would probably start at a lot of Big Ten schools. So I mean, and because it's so competitive in those rooms, I thought they played really well. And they're on top of their game, especially Allegro. I really liked what I saw out of Allegro the last game.
Yeah, I loved Allegro. It's funny. I was rewatching the game and I did like a video or just a screenshot of Allegro's in. He was in there with Cheney. He's noticeably bigger. Like Cheney's fast and Cheney is really like wired up. Allegro's just a big dude. He's a physically imposing inside linebacker. Where do you think he goes the rest of this year in terms of his reps? Does he maybe move into a little bit more of a timeshare with the two starters, or is it just going to be too hard for him to break through with Cheney and Thomas there?
I think of that second tier of guys I said of Allegro, Tackett Curtis, and Tyler Jancy, I think he can be at the top. I think he can be comfortably at the top of those three. I still think that one of those guys will probably emerge, but he's a little bit more of a strong side linebacker. I feel like I can see him kind of falling behind Cheney to where like they're a little bit more like old school, like more like in the box, like standing up, like like run at me, I'll take you down. And where Jaheim Thomas and Tackett Curtis, you can kind of move them around a little bit more. They're a little bit more diverse. They kind of represent like the future of the program and where like what kind of players that Fickell wants that Wisconsin didn't really have before. So I think that both of those guys, can still have a pretty central role. But I think if Allegro can continue to kind of if he can continue to do both, if he can continue to be that kind of old school linebacker, but also like rush a little bit more and show that athleticism, I think he could step. I think he has the best chances of being that third linebacker.
What do you think of this? Because I think one of the benefits of getting all these linebackers is you can use them really situationally. I think like a guy like Allegro, when you get an Alabama and Iowa, you have a little more physical teams. I think he gives you something a little bit more from a physical standpoint inside the box. And then you play in Oregon, who's going to spread it out a little bit more. I mean, they're still physical, but then you maybe use more of that speed from Thomas and Cheney.
Mhm. No, yeah, absolutely, and, like, especially because the interior defensive line, like, isn't as like, they don't feel as confident about that, so you're gonna need some bigger bodies because the running game, like, I don't know if we'll talk more about it, but, like, the run defense on Friday was one of the more alarming,
Yeah.
parts of what I saw at Wisconsin, you know what I mean? Like, their defensive line just was kinda getting mowed down, and they're getting mowed down by Western Michigan. It's a little bit worrying about what's, looking forward to Alabama or Oregon, you know what I mean? So, they're gonna need big guys on the inside, like, anywhere they can get him, and Christian fits that bill.
Well, let's talk about that, because that was something Curtis Holland was on the show yesterday, we talked about it. He was frustrated, I think he made a good point, they played a bunch of 2-4-5. I kinda countered with, I think they're playing a bunch of 2-4-5 because I don't think they have a ton of depth that they feel great about on the defensive line to play a 3-3-5. Um, I don't know, where are you at on the defensive line? Is there a fix for it this year? Schematically, do they play more 3-3-5 and just kinda roll the dice and say, "I hope the depth stays fresh"? What's the answer there? Or the answer might just be there's not one this year.
I mean, you obviously hope for improvement. You hope that a guy like Whitlow, the D-line coach EJ Whitlow, he has a good track record of improving his units. You hope that he works his magic. Then I guess you get a little gimmicky elsewhere with like the roster. Like they were playing Daryl Peterson on the inside a lot during fall camp, like in Platteville. I mean, but that doesn't really feel like more of a permanent, like whole patch. Or I mean, Brandon Lane was a guy that didn't really play on Friday, and they brought him in via the transfer portal, and he's one of those guys that you would hope filled in for the plethora of guys that they did lose. So, I mean, I'd say try to invest in Lane. I would say try to see their young talent too, like Dylan Johnson. He's a guy that Fickle has said a few things about. That's probably where you're going to see more improvements rather than hope that Ben Barton suddenly, becomes way better than he's been the past few years.
Talk to me about Lane because he's a guy I was in Platteville. I mean, that's where we met up. I thought he looked pretty good in Platteville, and he was solidly in kind of that second group getting reps. I thought he had some really nice one-on-ones. Why why do you think he didn't play?
I mean, it's tough because I agree with you. I thought he looked like one of the better defensive linemen. I thought he was huge, and he moved with a special kind of force that the other guys don't really move with. As far as I mean, and it's a similar reason, similar thinking for why the freshman running backs didn't maybe play as much. But when you look at last year, I think it's safe to say that there were some locker room issues. It wasn't the best in terms of team morale and the way. I mean, obviously, I don't want to speculate on anything. All we really have is the Hunter Wooler, rant
Mhm.
after the Northwestern game, which was talking about certain guys who maybe weren't as bought in and weren't as committed. And you think about the root of that. I'm not really sure. I'm not in the locker room, but bringing in as many transfers as they did last year, and it feel like it might create a little bit of division. You know what I mean? Because it's like guys who have been in Wisconsin for 3, 4 years, been grinding on the bench. Suddenly, their jobs getting taken from someone who just waltzed in from some school on the West Coast, and that probably created that probably didn't create the best feelings. And maybe the coaches learned from that. And the coaches said that, all right, like if we bring a guy in, like we're going to make sure that he really earns a spot on the field and not just instantly give him a starting gig or instantly let him play. So, but then again, that is just my speculation about Walker because I really have no idea why they wouldn't play a guy who looked talented at a position that they clearly need talent in.
Yeah, and it's a super fair point. Managing the locker room culture, it's more difficult now for coaches than ever, right? Like I think we would all acknowledge that. However, this is also the new era of college football. Like, and that's like you got to play the best guys, and you bring in those guys for the portal. They're coming into play too. I just thought it was super weird. I imagine we see him going forward, unless there's something else going on that just isn't public. But whether maybe it's nursing an injury, like I'm not speculating either. Maybe there's something there that they're just not going to say, and that happens at times in football and in sports. But I was surprised he didn't play. You mentioned the two freshman running backs. In camp, Platteville, Luke Fickell specifically said we have to play those guys,
Hmm.
and you didn't see either of them, right? Even like it just felt. If I could describe the whole game in one word, it felt a little tight. Um,
Yes.
Thoughts on those guys going forward? They're going to play, right? They have to. They're too talented to play. And you mentioned the transfer portal thing. You got to almost play the young guys.
Hmm. No, absolutely. And the weirdest part is that it was a game when they ran like 40 times or something like that. Like they gave Ches Malusi 19 carries even though which was 4 more than they ever gave him last year, and he's coming off of an injury. You know what I mean? And so and even they gave Cade Giacomelli a few carries, and that was the most puzzling thing. Like when we saw Cade in I think the third quarter, and we hadn't seen the freshman, that was strange. And building a little bit on what I said before, they probably it might just be cultural. Cade is a guy who's stuck around and he's clearly improved. He had some great camps, and maybe they want to give him opportunities before they give some of the young guys opportunities. But it's one of those things where it's if it doesn't change, if it doesn't change against South Dakota, we're gonna have to start asking, have to start hammering Fickell about that, because. And I think this upcoming game, it might be another grinder. It might be more run heavy, and if we don't see the freshman, I think it'll be a little concerning, maybe.
Well, I think it's a fair talking point because they've set the expectation that they would play. I mean, that's not us speculating. That's literally what the coaches have said. We have to play these guys. So I think it's a very fair question to ask. Today's episode is also brought to you by our great friends over at Game Time. You want to buy a ticket to get somewhere, and if you're not using Game Time to do that, what are you doing? Why are you spending more? Why are you wasting more time? Why are you not getting the best seats? Because those are the questions you should be asking yourself if you're not using Game Time. Game Time is the biggest selection, best prices, flash deals, so they actually get a little cheaper as it gets closer. You don't have to plan months in advance. I've used it literally on my way to Truist Park to watch a Braves game in a taxi, getting tickets. It's that simple. I had no stress, no worries, because I know what Game Time does. I got the tickets emailed to me right before I got into the stadium. It's fast, incredible, powerful. This is the ultimate way to get all your tickets. There's panoramic views of the seats before you even sit down. So you don't just get to see the stadium, but you get to see what's around you. Game Time removes the stress, makes it cheaper, has the biggest inventory. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. And again, very appreciative of Donnie jumping in for sure. I always love new perspectives. We get a little smarter. I think everybody new that comes on, I love it. So I appreciate Donnie for coming in. What do you want to see? What's the biggest thing you want to see week 2? Is it more explosive offense? Is it stronger on the defensive line? If you have to narrow it down, what are you looking for?
The offense doesn't have to be more explosive per se, but I do just want to see more consistency from the passing game. Not just for Tyler Van Dyke, but for some of these receivers too. I mean, you have a guys like CJ Williams and Bryson Green who made a lot of improvements, who didn't have the 2023 that they probably wanted, make a lot of improvements, and then they come out and they don't really get that many opportunities, or as many opportunities as they maybe should have. So say just more consistent passing game, obviously get Pauling involved, but get Tretch involved too. More Tretch, that's another thing. Just always more Tretch. He's probably the second most. I want to word this properly, but he's probably the second most dangerous receiver on the team. I don't know if he's the second best, but Will Pauling's the most dangerous. He's the best. He can get open the easiest. But man, if they give Tretch more opportunities, I think he's really going to get open easily and show why he was the talk of the town in spring and fall camps.
I'm going to throw this up here. This is from Craig Fizzle. I'm curious on this. Speed up the cadence between plays. We were much slower than the Fickell coach teams in Cincy. And then you couple that with, if you remember first spring fall practice with Coach Longo, right? The reporters were talking about the tempo in practice, how Wisconsin's going to push the ball, how it's going to be really quick. It doesn't feel like we played with that tempo in games, especially down the stretch last year, and certainly not in week 1. Does it surprise you that we don't play with more tempo, or we haven't yet?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even last year, that was one of my questions. Throughout last season, I remember I was thinking back to last season and how the first 3 games, I think Buffalo, Washington State, and then Georgia Southern. They looked kind of tight. They looked kind of slow. They looked a little sluggish. And then against Purdue, they came out, and the first quarter they were running tempo. It was aggressive. They had a rhythm and a flow, and a lot of that was because they were running tempo. It was hurry up. They were getting to the line, and their play reflected that. Their energy, you could see it. And so that's one of the biggest questions that I have. Just constantly about the offense. They've shown that they look good whenever they're playing with some more urgency and energy, but they just don't. And I mean, maybe you could think that they're trying to kind of offset them, and they're trying to slow the game down on purpose, but I think it's hurting them.
Yeah, I think at least some selective tempo would be useful. I know somebody mentioned they don't think we have the offensive line depth to run tempo, but the really good teams run tempo and they're not swapping out their offensive linemen. Like I don't think. Again, I'm not even saying run it for 60 minutes, but I think a couple drives, maybe you speed it up and you get some people on their heels a little bit when you get something working. I don't know. I would like to see more of that as well. Donnie, wrap up here. Any last thought? Any big picture thing that you don't think has been talked about enough, or any last bit of narrative that interests you either from week 1 or going into week 2?
I will say what's not getting talked about enough. I don't know. I feel like the quarterback situation. I mean, I don't want to be like a hot take guy, but like I don't know if the quarterback battle like ended when it was decided. I'm not saying that like Van Dyke's performance in week 1 was like rough enough for them to like swap it, but I just think it's something to monitor looking forward. That if they're asking Van Dyke to play more like low key, like just do what you're told, kind of like a little bit more like Shanahan 49ers with their quarterbacks, like that's more Braden Locke's strengths, and it's not Tyler Van Dyke's strengths. He's the guy. Like he can throw it down the field. He can push the offense. And if you're going to play Van Dyke, you might as well play Van Dyke football. I mean, if you're going to play like this, you might as well just put Braden Locke in.
Yeah, I love that take. Yeah, we made a similar one on the post game. I think what I said is this can't be the game plan if you want Tyler Van Dyke. Like that just can't be the game plan for him because it's not suited. He is Donnie Slusher. Go give him a follow at Donnie Slusher _ on Twitter, or check him out over at Rivals. Donnie, thank you so much for everyone tuning in on Wisconsin, and we will talk tomorrow.
Thanks, Ryan.